would you go? Because you'd be following in the footsteps of this lot, your former colleagues. You'd be following in the footsteps of, oh, look, there's David Cameron. He went off to China to go to meet leaders there. Oh, Theresa May went off to China as well. George Osborne there as Chancellor went, and Philip Hammond was the Conservative Chancellor who also went to China. So would you go to China?
They weren't going to China at a point that our economy was in significant distress. And it is completely wrong for the Chancellor at a point that we have this stress in the bond markets with the consequences that I've set out for people right up and down the country, their living standards, their businesses, their livelihoods and so on. The Chancellor should be here at her station, reassuring markets and trying to give some sense that this government gets the depth of the problem and it has some clear plans.
So as Chancellor,
because don't take my word for the fact that people don't have
visit
confidence.
to see the Chinese government.
Sorry,
if you were Chancellor, you would have ditched a planned visit to see the Chinese government and Chinese investors because of what was going on in the markets. It's a yes or no.
I would most definitely not be in Beijing or Shanghai at the moment talking to the Chinese cap in hand for some kind of deal, trade arrangements, etc., at a time that these kind of momentous things are happening around the UK economy. Okay. She needs to get a grip, and she should be here in order to do that.
Okay, and Ben Houchins.
Rachel Reeves will remain in post for the whole of this parliament, Downing Street said, as the Chancellor faced criticism over an economic storm that saw the pound lose further ground against the dollar and the cost of long-term government borrowing hit a new high on Monday. British 30-year government bond yields jumped to a fresh 27-year high early on Monday, extending a gilt market sell-off into a second week in a fresh blow to the Chancellor. 30-year gilt yields opened around 6 basis points higher on the day to hit a high of 5.47%, the highest since 1998, before easing back to show a roughly 4 bps rise. British government borrowing costs leapt last week on worries about the government's plans to sell more debt against a backdrop of a slowing economy and inflationary pressures in the United States. Once Donald Trump takes over the White House, Sir Keir Starmer on Monday gave his full backing to Ms. Reeves, who was returning from a trip to China to help boost growth, despite the UK's economic woes, saying she had his full confidence. Number 10 later confirmed she would be Chancellor for the whole of this parliament after Mr. Starmer had twice declined earlier to say she would stay in the role until the next general election. Asked why the Prime Minister had been unable to confirm whether her long-term future was secure, his official spokesman said, "You heard from the Prime Minister this morning. He was very explicit that he has full confidence in the Chancellor and he'll be working with her in the role of Chancellor for the whole of this parliament." Cabinet Office Minister Pat McFadden, one of Sir Keir Starmer's closest allies, dismissed speculation that Ms. Reeves could be removed as Chancellor amid talk he would be a frontrunner to fill her job. He admitted that her controversial budget, including a £40 billion tax raid, had taken some punches but defended it raising £70 billion to pour into public services, particularly the ailing NHS, which is struggling in another winter crisis. Asked on LBC Radio if the media would be speaking to him as Chancellor soon, Mr. McFadden said, "No, you won't. Rachel Reeves is the Chancellor for a good reason. She is the person qualified to do the job. When we came into office 6 months ago, we came in as a good team. We didn't have any of the rivalries and things that had afflicted other government, and we govern as a good team. Rachel Reeves is doing a good job with the support of the whole cabinet." Pressed whether he was interested in becoming Chancellor, he added, "I'm very happy doing what I'm doing." But Shadow Chancellor Mel Stride said Ms. Reeves' visit to China was tone-deaf and she should have been reassuring markets in the UK. He told Sky News' Sunday Morning with Trevor Phillips, "The markets move fairly quickly, and sentiment and confidence is at the heart of the approach that a good Chancellor should take. Now, if you absent yourself and go halfway around the world when bond yields are rocketing up, particularly in this country, with very serious consequences, then you need to be at your station reassuring those markets, and I'm afraid it's rather tone-deaf to not have got that in the first place." He claimed it would cost an additional £12 billion a year to pay for national debt as a result of market change that has real implications for people. But Mr. McFadden argued that it would have been a bad mistake for Ms. Reeves to have called off her trip to China to stay in the UK to deal with the growing economic woes. Rachel Reeves will remain as Chancellor until the next general election, Keir Starmer has insisted, as he warned the Treasury would be ruthless over public spending cuts to help meet the government's fiscal rules. The Treasury is looking for billions of pounds of savings from departmental budgets to balance the books at this summer's spending review, after another difficult day on the economy that saw the cost of government borrowing rise and the value of the pound fall. Starmer said that Reeves was absolutely right to take a tough approach to public spending after a bruising week in the markets and concern among some Labour MPs over her plan to get the economy back on track. Yes, we will be ruthless, as we have been ruthless in the decisions that we've taken so far, the Prime Minister said at the launch of the government's Artificial Intelligence Action Plan in East London. We have got clear fiscal rules, and we are going to keep to those fiscal rules. And that's why the Chancellor was absolutely right in the words that she chose to describe the approach that we will take. In a speech to the Institute for Government next week, Darren Jones, the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, will warn Cabinet colleagues that they will be expected to undertake sweeping reforms to public services as part of the spending review. He is expected to say, "I don't accept the idea that we should just keep spending more for poor outcomes. Taxpayers and the users of public services deserve better. We therefore won't settle for doing things the same and hoping for a different outcome." We've seen that play out with a £20 billion black hole in the public finances and public services on their knees. We have to do things differently, and we will. Among the changes ministers believe are needed are significant reductions in the £300 billion a year welfare budget, with the annual cost of support payments for people with disabilities and health conditions currently forecast to soar 60% by 2029. Nobody credibly believes the welfare bill is sustainable, a government source said. Another added, the obvious route for any chancellor is to look at welfare. It's not just a moving target, it's a constant one. Surmise officials have been drawing up plans, expected to be published in the spring, that build on the Get Britain Working White Paper, to amend work capability rules that could save the Treasury £3 billion. One former surmise source said that among the options presented by the department would be the potential for a lower benefit option for claimants who are sick or disabled, but could work in some circumstances. A similar option was abolished by the Conservatives in 2017, which some experts believe means more people tend to be judged as having severe incapacity, which gets a higher award. Officials are also exploring tightening the rules around what proof is needed to get payments. A more radical option still would be to examine the case for means testing personal independence payments (PIP), which helps disabled people with extra living costs and can currently be awarded regardless of income. The proposals risk triggering a backlash from Labour MPs and disability campaigners who fiercely criticized the Conservatives when they announced a similar overhaul of PIP last year. One source said there was no political bandwidth to make cuts to pensioner benefits, worth £150 billion the total welfare bill this year, after the fallout over the government's decision to cut the winter fuel payment. Other options to make savings include increasing the number of civil service redundancies. In the summer, the government rejected the previous target of cutting 66,000 civil service roles, but more than 10,000 jobs are expected to be slashed, first revealed by The Guardian last year. But one surmise source said there was a possibility of going further. There are 513,000 full-time civil servants in central government, up sharply from a recent low of about 380,000 in 2016. Reeves faces the possibility of having to make steep spending cuts by March to avoid being judged by the Office of Budget Responsibility to have breached her fiscal rules. She has already ruled out increases to either borrowing or taxes. She has faced intense pressure after yields on UK government bonds rose again when markets opened on Monday, reaching a decades-long high. Rises in the cost of borrowing are thought to have wiped out the Chancellor's £10 billion fiscal headroom, although much of the increase is driven by global economic factors and a difficult fiscal inheritance. It also reflects decisions taken at the budget in October that took the tax burden to record levels and increased public spending by £70 billion over the course of this parliament. The UK currency is also in focus after the turmoil in the bond markets. Sterling fell by a cent, or 0.8%, against the dollar to a low of $1.21 on Monday, the lowest since the start of November 2023, despite speculation over her future. The Prime Minister's official spokesperson confirmed that Reeves would remain in post right up to the next general election. He has full confidence in the Chancellor and he'll be working with her in the role for the whole of this parliament, he said. After his speech, Starmer said he had full confidence in Reeves and that she was doing a fantastic job. He declined, however, to say whether she would still be his chancellor by the end of this parliament. The Prime Minister also warned that turning the economy around after more than a decade of Conservative rule was always going to take time. We never pretended, nor would anybody sensibly argue, that after 14 years of failure you can turn around our economy and public services before Christmas, he said. Before the election, I said it is not going to be possible to do this in 6 months. It's going to take time. If you guys have enjoyed this video, please do not forget to subscribe and leave a like. Much appreciated.